Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday at Two Lines. Happy that you are choosing to be here tonight, and I'm pretty excited. Um, I've got Todd Ulrey coming on here in a few minutes, and I'm the reason why I'm excited is Todd and Ian Douglas, who's been on this before, started a podcast, a video podcast on YouTube, and it's been just a great show, and we'll get into that later. And that's one of the questions I have towards the end to ask about, so we can give them a good plug. But just been watching a lot of slot car racing on YouTube, like a lot of us, and all of a sudden started hearing Todd's name pop up all the time in conversations and on these live streams. And I thought it'd be cool to bring him in and talk slot cars and see how he got into the hobby, and then we'll go from there. But let me do some shout outs to who all's in the chat. We've got, I don't know, gosh, got a lot of 54 people on already. Wow. So we got George. Hello, George, and White Wolf, and D.W. Barker, Rob, Mark Cunningham, Chris Frater, Mr. Albright is in the house. Welcome, John. Thanks for being here. Appreciate you guys. Elmer is in. Man, we got a lot. My brother Dusty's here. HSF, Shady Dave, Dave from Slot R. Thanks, Dave. Dave, appreciate the message earlier. Thanks, bro. John Tucci, Ron at So Fast Speedway, and then Jamal is in the house, Slot Cars of Atlanta. Shout out to Jamal. Talked to him earlier today. Jamal is making some great slot car t-shirts. Check out his Facebook page, actually his website. But he's been posting a lot of stuff on Facebook of the design process and sewing them, and they look fantastic. So I think I've got a shirt coming from Jamal, so we'll show it off when it gets here. I'm pretty excited about that. But Jamal, thanks, man. If somebody, one of the moderators, could put his web address out there for that website, that would be great, so guys can find it. All right. Well, hey Jamie, good to have you. So I'm tired of talking to myself. I'm gonna bring Todd on. So Todd, thanks for joining, man. I really appreciate it. And you are out in California, out in Los Angeles, right?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. How's the weather out there?
It's not bad this week. It's 60s pretty much. We go
That's
between
good.
the 60s and the 70s all year long, so it's great.
Yeah, I spent some time in San Diego this past summer for a wedding, and so my wife and I made about a week-long trip out of it. And man, you get spoiled with the weather there. It was like 70 degrees all the time, the whole week.
Yep.
I
like to tell people, because I grew up in Minnesota,
yeah.
Skull Vikings, and then I lived in Phoenix for a long time. So I ended up, finding my way to the middle and living where I don't have to deal with either of those things.
There you go. No snow, no scraping of windshields, no shoveling snow. Yeah, you get out of that. That's pretty good.
No heat. That's so hot. Heat. You can cook cookies on your dashboard.
Yeah. You got that in Phoenix when you were in Phoenix, didn't you? I've been there a couple times. Love the city. I spent some time in Tempe, near the university, and I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. But when you walked outside and it was 112 or 118 degrees, and you're like, yeah, there's no humidity, but it's still 118 degrees.
Yeah, it's still hot.
It's still hot, no matter how you slice it. So, let's jump right in. So you, like I said in the intro, I started watching all these live streams of races out of Electric Dreams, and your name kept popping up, and then this last race, or actually from the podcast, I found out that you really haven't been doing this very long. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do and how you got into slot cars, and share a little bit of that journey, and because it really hasn't been that long.
Yeah. So, I mean, I live not far away from Electric Dreams, and let's see, it was probably 2022. Anyone who's been to Electric Dreams will know that the place next door is it's called Scooter's Jungle. It's like a birthday place, like a gymnasium type thing. And my wife actually took my son there for a birthday party, and saw they used to have this big mellow yellow NASCAR out front of Electric Dreams. So they saw that, they went in there. Marco, I think, actually let him sit inside of it.
Nice.
And so he was just jazzed about that. And then it was the week before Father's Day. So they do a big swap meet on Father's Day. They, like have a huge thing. And so my wife was like, "Oh, we'll bring him back. We'll bring Dad here for Father's Day. He'll love this." And so we went, and that was pretty much the worst decision she could have ever made. And I told her, I said on the ride home, I said, "You messed up. That was not, you shouldn't have done that."
That's funny.
And I got, it's funny because I kind of, for that first month, I was like, "Am I really going to do this? Am I really going to go race and do this stuff?" And then slowly it was just like, "Yeah, I'm going to do this." And then that first race, I did that. I think I bought 2 more cars that day for the first slot at nationals, which was like the next month. And I was just totally hooked from there.
Yeah. So
And,
what year was this?
like this was 2022.
2022. Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, it's been almost 3 years now. But
Wow.
I pretty well dug right in quickly, and the group there is really open, right? So, um, there are a lot of people to ask questions, and I'm just kind of a tinkerer by nature. So I think I finished fifth by my third race, and it was kind of like, looking back from there.
Yeah. That's a quick progression. So, I guess had you been involved in any other kind of forms of racing in the past?
Um, so I did bike racing for a long time, like
Okay.
cycling, and did, competitive in that, and trying to think if I've really done any other like forms of. I mean, I always played sports in school. Like I've always been competitive. I come from like a super competitive family, so
Yeah.
it's like if there's something that you can do and like compete against someone at, like I want to do that. Like it's just, I like that aspect of it.
Sure.
And then stock cars just brings into it like a whole other element of racecraft, and just that whole part of just kind of keeping in the moment in the race, and focusing on what you're doing and trying not to let that moment kind of just become too big for you, which is it's a fun challenge.
Yeah, it is fun. I think back to my first big race, which was this past November at the Nationals, um, the NSR Eastern Nationals,
Yeah.
and yeah, I let the moment get a little too big for me. Like the first couple stints, I was shaking so
Yeah.
bad. I was like, I
Hmm.
couldn't get control of the adrenaline in my body. And once I finally got control of that, then I settled down. I was like, oh, I'm having a blast. This is why you do this. This is what makes it fun. But like even though it's toy cars, we joke about being toy cars. The competitive side of it is really like it feels like any other form of racing I've ever done, whether it was BMX or RC cars or I raced Honda Odysseys, if anybody knows what those were. Like before the side by sides came out, this was way back. I raced a couple times with those, and like it was the same exact feeling standing up around the driver's stand. And I think that's what. But there was probably little chance of me dying, which is the great part about that kind of racing. But yes, so it gets, you kind of get addicted to that a little bit. And makes it a lot of fun. So it's pretty cool having a couple really nice tracks right there in your backyard. But have you gone to any other races outside of that, other clubs? And because there's a lot, the race scene in California is actually really pretty good. There's a lot of places to go.
Yeah, I mean, there's like Far Out Club, right? So
Yeah,
they've got quite a few venues, home tracks that you can go to, and then they also race at a place close by here called Big Lou's, which is a pretty big skill extra track. Um, and obviously, I've raced up in Modesto,
yeah,
where Ian
yeah,
races
Motown.
at town, which is a whole other experience because that's a really tricky track. And a lot of guys from Southern California have gone up there and been rightfully humbled by that track because it's something totally different. It's just
Yeah,
it's a very tricky track.
I've watched quite a few of their live streams, and it looks like it's pretty challenging, but it looks like a fun layout though. Like,
It's super fun. What I think is obviously the big difference is that it's a track that is run on with 24 scale cars, so it's got residual spray glue on it,
yeah,
so it's got a lot of grip. Um, but as you know, I've gone up there and talked with Herman a bunch about it because Herman knows that track from a long time, and there's just things about that track that I don't think they weren't thought of for 24 scale because like the kink in the straight or just like a lot of the little tiny things that for 32 it's like, oh my god, I have to actually like count for all this stuff. Like
right.
it was never even a thought to them. Like they didn't have to blip it on the straight. They didn't have to do a lot of the stuff. That's all those little details that make that track really, really tricky because it's one of those where it's just like you'll be cooking, you'll be doing good, and all of a sudden it'll just bite you.
Yeah.
And
And
then
then,
you're off. And then, yeah.
and it takes a couple of laps to get back into the groove, and then you find yourself
Yeah.
behind. Yeah. Yeah. I think that, a lot of those big wood tracks, they really weren't thinking 132nd scale when they built all those. They were thinking 124 and some of the older tracks. But I love the fact that a lot of those clubs have made the transition to 132nd scale on those big tracks. So then gearing becomes a big part of the tuning, and so it creates a whole
Mhm.
nother challenge. But yeah, that you do have some great tracks. I know. I think.
Yeah, and in fact, the new track at Electric Dreams, we raced 32nd scale on that when it was still at Buena Park,
Okay.
and that's that track is very it's like wide open. It's not very technical, especially not for a 32nd scale car. So it was really just a matter of, like you said, like tuning with gearing, just throwing a ton of gear at it because that
Yeah.
track is so big. The turns are so big compared to the 32nd scale track at Electric Dreams. You know,
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's a different challenge.
Yeah. So you have raced on plastic as well.
Yeah, so I've raced Big Lou's is a Skillelectric
Yeah.
track, and then we have the Polycar track at Electric Dreams, and so we've done Tuesday night races on that. And it's funny because at first I didn't think I was going to love that layout. Like
Yeah.
it's got a lot of like really short, quick turns and really tight turns.
Right.
Because it goes all the way down to like an R1 radius and some of those
Yeah. The
on
Polycar
the inside
R1
lane.
is very tight.
And for some classes like DTM and Trans Am, and we raced Polycar F1 on that, and it's so fun for those. Like it's those classes with like that speed of motor is like it's a blast because it's like a slightly bigger version of like what people were probably doing, on their home tracks on the living room floor, right? Like it's
Sure.
just you're getting the rear end loose and you're kind of knocking each other around, and
Yeah.
it's a little closer to that. And I had a lot of fun actually racing on that track.
Yeah. The Polycar seems to be the route that they're going uh, for overseas now. So a lot of the
Yeah.
Ninko is being replaced with Polycar for like the NSR WRE
Yep.
24-hour race, and so I think it's kind of between it and Scale Auto, they seem to have cornered what the newer races are going to be on. So if you can figure
Yeah.
those, and those two tracks are different. The Polycar is super grippy, with a lot of texture, and then the Scale Auto is kind of in between that and Carrera, my Carrera track behind. So I think if you can figure out what to do on each of those surfaces, you're in pretty good shape. The NSR Eastern Nationals is on Scale Auto Pro Track.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never raced on scale. I've wanted to. It looks like a very good track system. I've seen it, I've felt it, but I've never driven on it.
Yeah, it surprised me. I was expecting it to be pretty bumpy, but once they got everything down and locked in, it was really smooth. It was a
Yeah.
really good surface. So they've done a nice job with
So
that.
Polycar is too.
Yeah,
Polycar track is basically like when we started driving on the one at Electric Dreams, besides some of the guides not transferring over, like the setup is almost identical to wood because it's so smooth. The seams aren't like
yeah.
uh, crazy bumpy or anything like that. So I'll actually be in Italy next month racing on
Are you
Polycar at the WRE. So that'll
okay?
be
Well, I've got some friends headed over that are probably in the chat. Greg, his name would be Bud Slots in the comments, and then Steve
mhm.
Holzman. They're racing on the Spirit of America team, and with some guys from Slot Car
Is that?
Corner and some guys from Michigan. And I think you've met Corey Jett,
Yeah.
yeah, from Michigan. He's on that team
Hmm.
as well. So some good people. Yeah. So you'll have some good
Yeah,
company from the
I'm looking
Americans over there.
forward to it.
Yeah. That's awesome that you're going. Uh, yeah, that's coming up pretty quick.
Yeah, I know. I've been kind of working on the cars.
Yeah.
I'm a little behind on that, but luckily the setup on them, there's not a lot of parts options. So
Yeah, it's pretty you're pretty constrained on what you can do with those cars.
yeah.
So so now that you've been in racing for a couple of years and you got to race quite a few different classes, right? In some of those bigger races. What I guess what do you love about it, or what is your favorite thing about the about racing that you've discovered over the last couple of years?
Honestly, I mean, especially like the last probably year and a half when I've really been consistently like competing for wins, that aspect of it, like that those finals and going into the finals and you know being past that like jittery phase of that, right? Where like what you were describing at NSR Eastern, like I can remember back to, my first times where I made it into A mains and was genuinely like competitive and the first couple lanes I'm just shaking and
Yeah,
like you can't control that.
yeah,
And now that I'm kind of past that part, I really like um going into those finals and obviously the whole weekend hanging out with my friends and Ian comes down, but really those finals and going into that and just kind of putting it all out there, putting a strategy together and being kind of in that like flow state in a final. It's just something really unique and there's no other place that you kind of experience that, at least for me.
yeah, yeah. I think that's yeah, that's the fun part of the hobby for me is I, pro- I enjoy the racing piece, but for me, I love just being around the guys at the track. There's just something
Yeah.
special about that, you know. And I've already heard you guys talk about that on your podcast. That's a great piece of it. I think we have a lot of tracks out there, club tracks that are creating some really great cultures, and it's because of people want other people to succeed and have fun and enjoy themselves there. I think that environment is just kind of infectious. And so when you get a chance,
Yeah.
when we drive, my brother and I drive almost 2 hours to go to Cincinnati to race on Thursday nights over the winter at Cincy Slots, and we it's a 2 lane Carrera track. So when we run the analog class, you run two stints, lane one, lane two, and the total laps is your winner. It's a 3.5 minute stint in each lane. So we drive 2 hours to race for 7 minutes, and it's worth every minute of the drive because of the
Yeah.
people we get to see and hang out with, and we've just formed great friendships and bonds with those people. So I think from my standpoint, that's one of my favorite things that have happened. But you get a chance to run in the fast race. Yeah, there's nothing like that. That's a lot of fun
Yeah.
for sure. So, what are some of your favorite cars or classes, I should say, that you enjoy?
I really like GT. I feel like right now there's so many good cars in GT. There's so many brands that have good cars in GT. Um, like I've talked about this with Ian so many times that I really wish there was like, we're spoiled for all these great races, right? Like
Yeah,
Slotted Nationals and all the races Electric Dreams does and NSR Eastern Nationals and all those. But like, I really wish there existed like US GT championships that just had all the brands that make GT cars. And I think there's so much out there for that class. There's so much in the pipeline for that class
yeah,
that's yet to be released. Um, that I really think it's, to me, the most exciting one of what's currently out there. Obviously the hypercar stuff is starting to come out, um, and that's pretty scale auto focused,
yeah,
which is a brand I really like. And those are fun. They're a challenge to tune because they're really big long cars, but
right.
um, yeah, the GT stuff really just always seems to be where I like to seems to be the cars that I end up just kind of accumulating where I'm like, oh, I'm going to build that at some point, and then
Yeah.
you don't always get around to them.
How big's the collection getting now? That you don't
I
count.
always
You know,
joke that I
you
don't
don't want to
have
really
a
want to
lot
know.
of cars that
Yeah,
I guess this is like the trick, right? Like I might only have like 20 cars that are actually put together.
that's
But
funny.
I might have the parts and the bodies and all that to put together like 80.
That's funny.
But if anyone asks, I can just say I only have 20
There
cars.
you go. That's a good answer. That's good with the wife too, right?
Yeah.
But you can always say, "You got me in this," right? So that's you always have that to fall back on.
Yeah. That excuse worked for a little bit.
Yeah. So all the tracks you've raced on, what's your favorite right now? What do you enjoy the most? Do you
Um,
have one?
I still really like the Cunningham track at Electric Dreams.
Yeah,
It's such a unique track. Um, it's the only really like purpose-built commercial 132 track
yeah,
that's finished in gloss epoxy that has the lane spacing that it has, and the design of that track, because I think it originated from a sketch of Scott Bader's, who's the one who owns Electric Dreams, and the design of that track is just so it's I'm trying to think of the phrase. It's really easy to get like 90% good on it,
yeah,
and then that extracting out that last 10%, you start to figure out like all the fine little details and differences of every turn, and it's like it's deceivingly difficult
yeah,
where to get that last bit of speed, and it's just I think it's a well thought out, well designed track. It's just a lot of fun to drive on.
yeah,
So yeah, I guess I have to say the the
yeah,
track I started on.
yeah. Sure. No, that's fair. They did make a big change this past year with going from magnetic braid to non-magnetic braid. How do you feel that
Yep.
transition's gone for people?
Um, it's probably a little still in process because we didn't really get to drive on it until about a month before Scale Auto for the first time. I think they did their grand reopening about a month before the race. And there were a few things that made that, like there was some issues where uh there was just like some contact cement left in the slots, and once that all got cleaned out, like it drives really great. It doesn't drive that differently.
Yeah,
It's the cars that have to change, right? So
sure.
you're missing, depending on the car, right? So for Scale Auto, which is what we race, like you're losing a ton of downforce because those cars with the Sprinter motors we run have, when it was magnetic braid, like we were getting on our downforce scales like 80 to 100 grams of
Sure.
downforce, which is
Yeah, it's
for a
insane.
non-magnetic car, that's a lot.
It's impressive. Yeah.
um and now you have nothing, right? So um
Uh,
there's a
yeah,
lot
that's
more weight, but once you get the controller adjusted, once you get the weight right, the track and the cars drive pretty much the same.
yeah,
um
that's what I noticed on the live stream that as the event progressed, people were starting to really figure it out, and the times were coming down, laps were getting better. So yeah, it just takes a little bit of time.
yeah, just like anything. I mean, if you go back and watch like the first races on that track, like in 2020, early 2022, and see how guys drove the track then to, even before they made the change, right? We were still finding speed on that track right up until, the switch over.
Yeah,
I mean, we were still setting records and probably would have for another year or two at least. Um, so, I mean, there's always stuff to figure out. There's always like little bits, but I really enjoy the non-magnetic braid. I was a big proponent of making that change just because I think it removes that aspect of tuning that I really didn't like.
yeah,
I just didn't like having to worry about that and feel like, you know, if you've got if you were better at that than someone else, like it's a big advantage. Meaning if you
right.
just paid attention to it and were aware that you needed to do that over someone else, like it's a big advantage. and it's not really that you're doing anything all that special other than making sure your motor is pushed down, all the way. But
Yeah.
uh, we could do without that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that one of the things uh, before I ever went to the club, I had never raced no magnets in a car. I started here with Carrera cars, and for the first 6 months, that was all we ran. We ran digital all the time, and we were having a blast.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I was probably about a year into the hobby, and we made the trip to Cincinnati to go watch. And I've told this story a million times, but we walked in, and they were like, "Hey, here's some cars you're going to run tonight." And we were just like, we just wanted to come watch, see what a night of racing looked like. But they threw us on the track with cars that had zero magnets in it. And I thought, I'm never going to be able to drive this car. And after about 10 laps, I was like, I love this.
Yeah.
This is like real race. Like, this is way closer to racing than I expected it to be. And we just kind of haven't looked back. It's been a great transition for us. So I do enjoy that piece of it. I do run on plastic track. So, if you can get the motor down close enough, you can get a little bit of some magnetic downforce, but a lot of the tracks we run, they have a minimum clearance to try to prevent some of that. So, and I think those are always good to have those kind of rules to try to keep it as fair as possible for everyone.
Yeah. And I mean, certain cars, it doesn't matter as much. Like when we race MR slot car with the flat six slotted motors, or group 5 with those same motors, like you're not getting a whole lot of
Yeah,
downforce with those.
right,
I think we raced Mosler with the Shark motors, and it's a millimeter clearance, so it's a pretty high clearance. Like, you're not getting a lot with that, and those
right.
classes won't change much. I mean, Scale Auto is the one that probably will change the most, because the way those pods are, the motor hangs like a half mil below the car already, so it's like
Right.
on the track.
Yeah. I so you saying you like the GT stuff. I I wasn't a big fan early on. I love the like slotted Group C. That's one of my favorite
Yeah.
classes. And I love the classics. I love the old Can-Am cars. So like the Thunder Slot, McLarens, and the Elvas, and those are some of my favorites. But the NSR C8 Corvette, that is a dang good car, and I really am enjoying getting that thing tuned up and running laps with it. It's just so smooth and quiet and just pretty easy to tune. So
Yeah.
for most people, I think. But one brand I haven't really jumped into too deep is Scale Auto, but they're on my list. I've got a couple cars picked out.
Yeah, it's funny. Like when we did the first Scale Auto Festival in 2023, you know, in our group down here, like not a lot of people had raced Scale Auto cars. We were aware of them, but they weren't as widely available yet.
Yeah,
They weren't distributing them at Electric Dreams, so they were coming from elsewhere. And it was just we were very much about like NSR. That was kind of like the big brand,
yeah.
and NSR makes really great cars,
Oh yeah,
and then they still do. Like the C8, like I have one that I'm building and doing a couple different chassis for. But the Scale Auto stuff is just, their cars are, I think, and the next step down, right? You've got like Slotted did like the first motor pod cars, and then I think NSR really kind of took it to that next
yeah,
level. And to me, Scale Auto, and probably Sideways too, like Sideways has a lot of similar tuning options in their cars, like the flex grooves and stuff like that. Like they're really kind of taking it to that next
yeah,
step of tunability with 30-second scale cars. And um, yeah, I just enjoy them. They're fun cars to put together, and fun cars to race.
yeah. We are in a special time right now in slot cars where we have some amazing choices from
Yeah.
a variety of companies. I even have, you can't really see all my collection, but I have a bunch of fly cars, and those cars are beautiful, but the chassis and it's not great. But that's a
Yeah.
fun class as long as everybody is like stuck with the same thing. We have a blast with them when we run the Fly Classic class. But Scale Auto is partnering with Fly, so you're going to take Fly's
Hmm.
beautiful detail and bodies, and you're going to put them on a really nice chassis from Scale Auto. I'm super excited about those flies that are coming out. So I think we've got some really
Yeah,
good
I've got a
cars coming.
couple of flies, and the detail in the bodies and just like the uh it yeah, I'm looking forward to having those with like a really good chassis under them. I think they'll be fun.
Yeah, I think those will be very popular. I don't know how many they announced, maybe four different cars, and they'll sell out quick. Meaning the fly cars really
Yeah,
sell
I'm
out pretty
sure.
quick anyway. But you throw a Scale Auto chassis that is designed by them underneath one, and they're going to go quick. So that's pretty exciting. What if if I say I were a beginner, although I still sometimes call myself a newbie in this, what are some of the I don't know some advice you would give a beginner jumping into the hobby right now?
Um, I think that the big thing is ask a lot of questions.
Yeah,
Don't be afraid to tinker with things, and don't be afraid to do things that other people say doesn't work. And for me, that was a big one. It took me a few months to really get comfortable enough being like, oh no, I think actually what I think works.
yeah,
And like, you know, Ian and I talk about this stuff a lot. It was really like right when we started um, hanging out, talking a lot, and working on cars together, like early 2023, was when a lot of that stuff finally started to like, I think, become apparent to the uh, at least the Electric Dreams scene and the people watching those races, where it slowly kind of started. Okay, the concepts that we've actually thought through, they work
yeah,
really well, and we're not crazy.
yeah,
Like so, that's I think a big one, and because there's a lot of we've always done things this way in slot cars, and this is the way we do it, and if you do it a different way, you're wrong.
right,
And um, you might be. Don't be afraid to be wrong. You might
yeah,
be wrong. It might be terrible. You know that now, and you know it better than just having someone tell you. You've got firsthand experience with it being wrong, and you might know how to make it right then.
yeah,
Um, so I think that's probably the big thing for me. And then also just yeah, I mean, yeah, don't be afraid to experiment. I think it's probably the biggest thing.
yeah. The first one you mentioned was my favorite, and that's what I always tell people when they ask me, like, "What advice do you give me?" And I'm like, "Well, I wasn't afraid to ask questions, and I had a million questions because I wanted my
Yeah,
car to perform at its best. Right? I wanted to go and have fun, but I also wanted to be competitive. I wanted to have a shot at putting in some decent laps, and so I had a lot of questions. And don't be afraid. There are lots of people at the track that are willing to answer questions. And I'm in a text conversation with a bunch of guys here locally, and there's every day there's just a barrage of questions that go out in that text group, and getting answers from all different perspectives, and it's all great information. And like you said, then you get to decide what works best for me and my driving style, because I could probably grab somebody else's car and not be as fast as I am in my car, and vice versa. They could grab my car and just not feel good to them, because I tune towards my tendencies. I tend to overdrive a lot,
yeah,
the turns a lot. So I tend to tune a car to be able to handle that, um, and hopefully cover up a lot of my mistakes. But I think you start discovering by asking lots of questions what works for you and what doesn't. And then somebody says, "Hey, take a spin with my car," and then you go, "Gosh, that's what a good car should drive like," because mine doesn't drive anything like that, which is always you get that chance. But if you don't ask questions, then you know people don't help you because they don't know that you need help, unless you're just really
yeah,
struggling on the track. If you're if that's really obvious that you're struggling on the track, then there are always people that'll say, after you come off and say, "Hey, let's try this. You don't have enough body flow. You don't have." So I think that I appreciate that when I'm at a track and people are willing to jump in and help people like that. So I think that's great advice.
yeah. And I think the 132 community in general is um, really great at
Yeah,
that. Like, really open group overall. Like, I don't think I've met anyone that's been really secretive with
yeah,
stuff, and um, even when we've come up with something that we're, doing for a big race, like as soon as it's done and used, like we've shown that to
Yeah.
everybody. And,
Right.
and, that was kind of one of the big impetuses behind starting, the podcast is, it- really it's just like a time thing for us, right? Like as much as I like helping people one-on-one at the track, and I obviously will still do that, like you just run out of time to be able
Yeah.
to help everybody. And it's just a way more efficient way for us to kind of get the things that we've learned out there and engage more people in the slot car community and in conversation. And you just being able to kind of collectively get everyone faster if we can.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's all about building a community. I feel like we've got a
Yeah.
great community here on Tuesdays that we all gather, and I'm just like the chat is out there doing its thing. I can't even keep up right now what's going on there. Remember, if you have a question, throw a Q in front of it so it stands out to me, and we'll get it on the screen and ask about it. But um, yeah, I think that's just so important to the future success of the hobby. And that kind of content is evergreen, right? You guys break down a car from the previous week's race and share the details of that. That's just going to live out there, and it will be a reference for people to come back to time and time again for that specific car or that class of cars. And so I think it's important. Greg just released the video a couple days ago of the breakdown of the Michigan 24 Scale Auto LMP, the Peugeot that won, and that was his car that Steve Holzman and Greg Kessler built with a handful of help from some other guys. But that team, they put together a great car, and it was a rocket ship the whole weekend. And they opened it up and walked through, and here's exactly the parts I used, and here's how we tuned it, and here's what we're using. And I think that's just important content for people to have available out there. So yeah, we can talk a little bit about
Yeah, absolutely.
and that's kind of the genesis of your podcast, right? It was you guys wanted to get that information out, but kind of like you said, in an efficient manner. Because I get that.
Yeah.
I walk into the club, and because of the YouTube channel, I walk into a race on a new track, and people want to talk and catch up and introduce themselves, and I end up getting zero time to tune my car because I've just spent all my time, meeting with people. It's
Yeah,
great, but
I've experienced that. And again, like I really love helping people, so I'm
yeah,
never one to like I'm never going to tell someone no.
right,
Um but I've definitely showed up, my days at the track if I get to go on a weekday because I work for an East Coast company, so my hours kind of I get that little snippet of time in the afternoon where it's
nice,
past 5 Eastern and before I've got to go pick my son up from school. So you know, I've got maybe 90 minutes there.
yeah,
And I've definitely had times where I've got there and I didn't hit the track until like 30 minutes before they were going to
right,
close.
right,
So, and that's fine. Like, it's,
yeah,
I want to help as many people as I can. I want other people to, experience that feeling of taking a car that wasn't good and making it good and understanding how you did that. Right. And
yeah.
that's, I think, one of the most satisfying things. And, to the extent that we can do that with a wider audience, that's really what we want to do.
Yeah, I think that the coverage that the races that you guys have been in, from Electric Dreams and Motown, and they're really stepping up their coverage of their races as well. So from the East Coast, we get a chance to watch all that and see what's going on out there, and so we're trying to do the same thing at the races that we have on this side, so that we have a bigger share of knowledge
Yeah.
and footage, and you can watch but you start developing like names that people recognize because they're always gravitating towards the top of the lists in qualifying and in the finals, and so like you and Ian and Herman and Jim Rose and all those guys, Rick Jockum, and like those have become, for guys who are kind of obsessed about the hobby, those are all names that we recognize. And we've got some names, when we go to Michigan and the nationals there, that are starting to pop up online, and people are recognizing those names. So you have an opportunity because you've gained credibility
Yeah.
because of what you've been able to do on the track. So I think that I joked with Ian the other day, and he told me I was full of it, but I think your podcast has the potential, because of what you guys have already done in the hobby, from a racing standpoint, to be one of the, like the most popular uh, pieces of content out there. I think you will have a great following. There will be a lot of people that tune in every time you post, a podcast. I think it could be bigger than anything else that's out there, and it's because how much you guys care about the details. And I think that that's sometimes what people miss. Is it's real easy to pull a car out of the box and change the tires or whatever and put it on the track, but getting deep into the details of what really makes a car go fast, I think that's what's great about what you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's something that we've felt like was an appetite for a while. And there was definitely, I mean, it's not to say it wasn't out there. There were a lot of channels out there and people who had put, videos up, or people on the forums who've made really great posts on how to do
Right.
things. But you really have to search for it, right? Or you have to know people at the track who know, and it's
Yeah.
the accessibility to the information. It wasn't quite where maybe it should have been. Um,
Yeah. It's hard to search
and
for, sure.
yeah, as much as we can bring that to people and share what we've learned, that's what we want to do. And if it gets big, it gets big. We were never really starting it to,
Yeah.
um, to reach a certain size or anything like that. But it's been, we're what, 3 episodes in, but it's been a lot of fun so
Yeah.
far. And I mean, it's really just an extension of conversations that we have on our own anyway. So
Right. Right. What are some of the things? We'll just talk about the podcast now. So it's called The Spinning Pinion, right? And
yep.
So you've had 3 episodes. Have you set on a schedule of how often you want to record? Or is it just going to be just kind of you guys feeling your way through that?
We're trying to release episodes once a week.
Okay.
We're recording them when we can. We're trying to record a couple at a time.
Yeah.
Just because, I've got, busy stuff with having a family
Yep.
and all that. So my schedule, especially during the week, it's like if I've got a pocket of time, I got to, really
Right.
take advantage of that. And, Ian runs his own company, and he also goes to bed at like 9 p.m. like an old person. So
That's
we
funny.
we tried to record a late night episode last night, and I think by the end of it, he was maybe half asleep already.
He
So
was dead. Yeah. That's hilarious. See, if I'd have known, I could have put that in the song.
yeah.
Nobody, you and Ian are the only people that
No
know
one
about my
knows. Yeah,
song. Yeah. So that's
it's
funny.
gonna be making a cameo on the show, I'm sure.
I probably should ask Ian. I'll share. I'll talk a little bit about it for a second. So you guys, the first episode, Ian sent it to me, probably about a week before you guys released it, and said, "Hey, can you watch and give me some feedback?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, man. I'd love to watch it." And so I tuned in, and the first thing I recognized was like he had AI write the theme song. That's awesome. I love it. And he's like, "What about that banger?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's a banger." I said, because I have a band, and I'm like, maybe I can get my band to cover that. And so that was kind of the running joke. And so then it became, I was sitting around this past weekend, and slot cars was really last week was kind of a rough week, and I wasn't really thinking much about slot cars, but I had watched the 3rd episode, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna write a parody song based on this and just make it, kind of poke fun at both of you a little bit. Not really. I mean, it was just saying some things that I picked up on listening to your
Yeah.
conversations. And so I sent that to him, like, I must have been Saturday night late. He's like, "What the heck is this?" So maybe it'll get released, who knows, but I rewrote the theme song. But yeah, you guys don't want to use that. Definitely. The AI version is way better. But so I
He
think
sent me
it's a great show.
the first time he sent me that AI version, I was like, I don't know, man. Really, it was a little it's a little corny, especially when you listen to the whole thing.
Oh yeah.
We just do the snippet, but
Yeah, it's good.
yeah, when you listen to the whole thing, it's It's funny.
Well, it
But,
sounds
you know,
like
once
a
you listen
song
to I
written by
caught
AI.
myself singing it to myself, like, 3 or 4 days later, so I was like, "Okay, I guess that's
It's
probably the
got
song then,
it's
because
got a
it's
catchy
catchy."
hook. Yeah, it's got a catchy hook. Oh yeah, I think the chorus is great, and I just thought it's so funny how it's using like AI. It's using every slot car term you can find out there in the verses
Yeah,
and the lyrics. It's great. So it's worth tuning in just to hear the theme song. But you know, you guys have
yeah,
tackled some things, you know, on the show already. Um, and one of the things you hinted around was a term that you used, and I think Ian quoted you when he was on my live stream, you know, last month. Uh, Concepts, not cars, and I think you actually put it
yeah.
in the text. Can in the chat? Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, I know we've talked some, but can you kind of go deeper into that so people understand what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like one I came up with as, you know, at some point in a conversation with Ian as we were talking about, you know, what gets people to not understand how to tune certain cars. And for me, I think what I see people get stuck on a lot of times is, "Oh, I've got an NSR. I need to do this, this. Like, this is what we do to NSR cars. I've got an MR slot car. You do this, this, and this to this car. This is how you." And it's so disjointed, right?
Yeah,
It's like everyone is its own separate little silo. And really, that's like pretty early on when we were figuring out, like, okay, here's what's working. You start to develop like an overall concept and understanding of what the car is doing, and starting from that point and learning how to make different types of cars do what you want them to do, meaning making different types of cars have your concept essentially tuned into them, is such a more powerful way of tuning, but it's also an easier way of
yeah,
tuning because you're not trying to relearn a car every single time. You're relearning the mechanics of the car because they're designed a little bit different, but it's really just, okay, I want the pod to move side to side without a lot of, up and down movement. How do I make this car do that? Um,
within
you
the
know,
rules, right, that are laid out there for you.
Within the
Yeah,
rules, of
yeah,
course, but, it's just like if it's a totally different design, how do I make this car do what I want it to do, move like I want it to move, and drive pretty similarly? And I think if you drive a lot of our cars, even across different brands and all that, they drive pretty similarly
yeah,
because we're using the same overall concept of what we want the car to do, rather than trying to figure out each individual car on its own, like it's its own isolated thing. And so that's where that kind of came from. And I've morphed it into like a hashtag
yeah.
now.
Right. Yeah, it should be on
I'm
a shirt
definitely putting
someplace.
that on a shirt at
Yeah,
some point.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, when he said it that night, I was like, yeah, that's really. I feel like that's kind of what we were the group that I kind of tune and we talk about cars. We have the same kind of conversations you guys do. We are kind of approaching cars in that exact same way. And so, like when Ian mentioned that, I was like, yeah, that's exactly how we're looking at it. We're not saying this is an NSR car, this is a scale auto car, this is a slotted car, this is Thunderslot. We're just saying, okay, here's how we like a car to be, and let's get each car to that point so that, like you said, anytime you jump on the track, every car feels similar. It drives the same, so you don't have to change your driving style, right? It just
Right.
you know you can expect what the cars can do. I think the biggest problem that people have from a tuning standpoint, and I think when I sent you a message earlier, one of the things I talked about was like for me is I I get through and I get the car tuned and it's not horrible. It's pretty good. But how do I get to that last 10%, or how do I troubleshoot a car? If the car is doing this on the track, how do I know what to do to attack that? And I think that's part of the art of tuning a slot car. But what are some of the things that you see from a car that you recognized early on? Because it's obvious that you have kind of an engineer's mind because how deep you jumped into tuning right off the bat and racing.
Yeah.
That that
In another
the
world, I would
details
have
are,
been an engineer.
yeah, but the details are important to you, right? And every good
Yeah.
tuner that I know, it's always about the details. But like my friend Greg can watch my car go around and go, okay, this is what you need to do. So how do you
Yeah.
develop that sense? Like, what are some of the things that you do?
Um, I mean, a lot of it's from the start, just understand, paying attention, right? Like
Hmm.
part of it's just being observant and not just saying like, "Oh, my car's coming off in this corner every time around," but how is it coming off? Right? Like, where is it coming off? Is it coming off in the entry? Is it coming off on exit? Like, and what's it doing? Is it sliding out? Is it traction rolling? You know, there's so many ways for a car to um, deslot or even just get, you know, loose or, you know, not take a turn ideally. And each one has, you know, kind of a reason behind it, right?
Yeah,
Um, One of our big things from early on was just understanding how much um, people were just going for grip like crazy. And we actually have a an episode that we're going to do on this, basically like how you know too much grip is slowing you down, because there's so many things that are, well, there's things that are obvious that happen when you have too much grip, like a car traction rolling. I think everyone understands when a car flips over that it's got too much grip.
yeah,
But the less obvious one that really trips people up is the differentialing D slots. And if you don't know what that is, like where you're going through a large radius turn and the car's going fine, but as soon as you push it, one of those tires has to slip. And when you've got a ton of grip, it one of those tires slips, and then the car kind of just like freaks out
yeah.
because it's super tight. It doesn't want to do that smoothly. And those are the ones where the car just pops out and goes straight into the wall. And I've heard so many people do that and say, "Oh, I need more grip. I need more traction." I'm like, you
That's
needed
not
the
true.
opposite.
Yeah,
And it's not obvious, right? And so those are the things like, and this is actually another topic we have and along these lines is like, how do you read a car's body language? What's
yeah,
it telling you that it's struggling with, right? Like, is it struggling to get the rear end around the turns, or is it too loose? Is it just a little unstable and its handles fine? It just needs a little more weight, you know, like there's so many different behaviors, but I think ultimately it can be distilled down to that, right? Like, does the car drive pretty okay? It just seems a little unstable. You probably just need a little tiny bit of weight. Um, and my kind of feeling with ballast is like I have this idea of at some point whenever I do finally do a chassis design that I'm going to put hash marks along the length and the width, because that's how I think of ballast, right? It's like a graph, like an XY scale.
yeah,
And that 0, 0 on the XY scale is right where the car wants to balance naturally. So like wherever the front rear balance is, that's kind of your origin. And that's where if you add weight at that point, it's going to have the most neutral effect on the car. It's going to get more stable, but it's not going to start doing things that are wildly different than what it did before.
yeah,
And then if it's doing something that is, you know, um, not what you want, right? Like it's maybe a little tail happy, or um, you know, it's traction rolling or whatever. You can start to move weight around in different spots and see the results of that. Like moving weight further to the outsides, right? It's going to keep the car flat. Um, it might let the car slide a little bit, but if you add more weight, it ends up allowing the car to handle more grip because it's, you know, not going to let it roll over.
right.
Likewise, if you're moving it forward and back, like that's a whole other can of worms, right? So you move it forward, you might get a little more slide. Move it rearward, you might get a little more slide, but they're different.
Yeah,
And even just playing around with that, right? Like spend a day at the track and just put the weight in the center, use the same amount of weight, but just start distributing that in different spots and seeing what it does to the car. And if you do things one thing at a time, you're going to start to figure out all the little levers that you can pull to make the car do what you want it to do. And that's obviously there's a lot of in-depth, you know,
Yeah.
process to that, but I think it can be distilled down to a pretty simple, like if this, then that
Yeah.
uh, thing, and that's kind of how I think about it. And I hope that we can, you know, cohesively put that out there for people to
Sure.
understand and be able to tune their cars at the track like that.
Yeah. That's actually that's a great way to look at it. I think that there's a lot of people who struggle understanding what the car is really doing. It's easy to misdiagnose. I know I have a lot. My cars tend to be a little tail happy, and sometimes I struggle getting control of that because I go the wrong direction. I start fixing what I think is causing it, and it's really something else. A lot of times for me, it's I thought I had the front end right, and the front end wasn't right. When I look at it and throw up on the setup block again, I'm like, oh yeah, that's there it is. That's what's causing some of this, and that, and that's just trial and error a lot. But yeah, those are great ideas. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
And the biggest thing too is like making one change at a time, right?
Yeah,
Make
right.
a change, see how it works. If it doesn't work, change it back. Like don't
Yeah,
do 4 or 5 changes at once, and then
and you have
it's
no idea
easy to
what.
get lost when
Yeah,
you do that, and just tend to get to a point where like, now this car is terrible and I don't even know how to get it back to when it was like kind of okay, right?
right, right. Yeah, yeah. I think we've all done that because
But
sometimes you get impatient, right? And that's a lot of times it's just
yeah,
you're in a hurry to get the car where you think it needs to be, and then yeah, you go down the wrong path.
yeah, I always think of that. It's from like Zombieland, I think, that aim small, miss small
Yeah,
thing of like, just small changes and see what it does. Small
yeah,
change and see what it does.
yeah.
I
That's
was
funny.
literally doing this at the track on Sunday on a 24 scale car with someone, and it's like the car just needed a little weight, and I just was just adding it little bits at a time, little bits at a time to see where it started to be like too much. And that's I think the part that gets most people is they want to get to that destination right away, right?
Yeah,
They're impatient. They want to get there, or they're in a hurry.
yeah,
And that's when you start doing things where it's like, yeah, I made all these changes, but it really didn't get me where I wanted to, and now I don't even know how to get back. And
yeah,
then it just ends in frustration.
yeah. This question is from Jim Rose, who says, "If we had a GT race, what would you run?" Just daydreaming. I'm
Oh
guessing
man.
there's a race coming up, and he's just wanting to know what you're going to run. So I think that question is, but
I don't know, they have, well, they do a GT class there, but yeah, it's a little different than ours. It's pretty similar rules to Electric Dreams, but um I've got to always go with the Scale Auto Viper.
oh
I
yeah,
don't know what it is about that car.
it's a
There is
popular
just
car.
something about the balance of that car, and that, bless them, they've come out with some really cool new cars, but none of them have quite got to that. Um, that there's just something about the balance of that car. It just I've never driven another car that so easily is like okay with getting a little loose and just rolls with it
Yeah,
and keeps on trucking. Like that car is just so much fun to drive.
yeah. There's a lot of guys that I know that run those Vipers. They really like that car, so it's definitely race proven for sure. I don't see any more questions at this point, but there's a lot. Ask Todd about the
Okay. Oh
inner
yeah. Okay.
tire and the
That's a fun
story.
one.
Okay, there you go.
So I don't know if for anyone that's kind of there's like seen my Instagram at some point, um, this goes back to, well, it starts before 2023 nationals, but we kind of used this at 2023 nationals. We use a tire, what we call an inter, which is basically a tire that's, well, it's not rough off the truer per se. We very carefully do the last little bits on the truer where it gets like sanding lines in it basically, and then we don't do anything else to it. And it looks like a rough cut tire.
Yeah,
Uh, but what we found in that certain environment where it gets really hot in there in the summer, and there was a lot of grip on the track, that actually lets the tire break away in a super linear way. especially with the slotted G25, which is what we used it on.
Yeah.
Um, and that was totally discovered by accident earlier in that year. I was racing, we were doing a Tuesday night DTM race, and I think we had to use slotted tires, and I had trued like N22s, and I had a set of G25s, and this is before I really knew how to true G25s well. So anyone who's trued them knows like they're a pain in the ass to true. And we I basically was like getting ready to go and still trying to get them trued, and I finally just threw my box like I can't finish these. Like I'm just going to throw them in there. They were still rough, and I'm running the N22s, and the car just got those DTMs are like really high center of gravity, right? It's just
Yeah.
traction rolling all the way through. So I'm like, well, I may as well throw these on here and just see. Maybe they'll be okay. And I kid you not, they were like, it was perfect. It was phenomenal. I was like, how is this even a thing? Like I didn't even ever think to just like leave tires rough and try to run them like that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work with every tire though, because we tried it in the lead up that year to the race with a bunch of different tires. And it's just, there's something about the G25 where it takes that texture, and it's such a durable tire because it's made for plastic track
Yeah.
that it holds onto that texture, and it cuts through really grippy track conditions well too. So like it works really great on spray glued tracks
Wow.
also. And yeah, so we basically leading into that whole race were trying to keep that under wraps because this was like our like coming out race in
Yeah.
terms of like we thought we had a chance for one of us to win it, and we didn't want to give out like any of the secrets before that race. And
Sure.
so we were running other tires, trying not to like waiting till like no one was there to switch those on and run those tires, because they were so obvious when you looked at them. And then finally, when we got to qualifying, well, that the race that week, it was hot all week, and then the weather for the weekend started cooling down. It was going to be like 70, and these tires were made to handle like hot, grippy conditions. And I'm like, oh man, it's going to get really cool this weekend. This might totally bite us. Like we've thought of the wrong strategy where this is going to
Right.
work. And we're standing in line for tech on Saturday, and there's like 70 people in Electric Dreams, and there's no air conditioning in there. So we're standing in line, and it's just getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And Ian and I are just looking at each other like, all right, it's happening.
This is
This is it.
perfect. That's right.
And then, anyone who watched that knows, like, I set a really good time, but then Ian towards the end, hit a 5.9 on his like second or third lap, and just out of sheer shock, because he didn't realize he was going to go that fast that easily, stopped the car. And then he was like, I can't collect myself to do a faster lap. Like, I guess I'm just, I guess I'm done.
I remember that he stopped, didn't finish that qualifying.
Well, to everyone on the feed, it looked like he stopped as like kind of a, mic drop moment, but I think it was really, he was just surprised. And then there was no way he was going to like reset with,
Yeah.
less than a minute to do a good lap again.
That's
So,
funny.
but
That's
that's
good.
just one of those things. It's like, it's to the point of like, don't be afraid to try things.
Yeah.
And if you find something that's completely unorthodox that works, trust that. Like, your experience on the track is just as valid as anyone else's. And if you can make something work, it doesn't matter if it's not what people do. Uh, it
Right.
it could be the next thing. And now that's a tool in our toolbox, right? Like whenever we've got a spec tire for a, a race where we don't have the option to switch to, a harder compound or whatever, we always know that we can take a tire and give it that intertexture, and it's going to drop the grip and make it, you know, slide in a predictable way. And
Yeah.
it's just, one more way you can adjust.
Right. That's great. But yeah, if you didn't try, you would never found that. That's the testing that's so important to the hobby. I mean, like my brother came over Sunday, and we just jumped on the track and just ran cars and ran laps and just tested. And you got to take time to do that. And that's where you discover that stuff, right? There was a
Yeah, that's
question.
almost more fun than the racing sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. PNW had a question, and I've skipped. There it is. He asked, I don't know how much 124 scale you do, but
Not a lot. I'm
Yeah,
getting more. Well, now that they have the Nyland track, which is named after Phil Nyland, at Electric Dreams, which is the
yeah,
former flat track from Buena Park.
yeah.
Um, we're doing more of it, but still not a lot.
Yeah.
Um, I know
So
what a cheetah chassis is,
yeah,
but
but
I've never run one.
yeah,
Ian
yeah,
would Ian would be better to answer that question.
yeah. So Ryan, hopefully somebody might be able to jump on there and answer that for you. Um, so what else do I have? Concept is not cars. You touched on that. Troubleshooting. That's great. Um, so what cars do you have on your bench right now that you're working on?
Well, I've got WRE cars that I'm getting ready. Um, we've got let me actually pull this one out. Try not to drop the weights out of it. So we've got the Electric Dream Team
Nice.
908.
Yeah, I love the
That
908. It's one of my
will
favorite
likely
cars.
be our car. I've got doesn't have tires on it, but I've got one of the NSR Lolas.
Yeah. Do you have any laps on that one yet?
Um, I have a few, but it was very quick. It was just kind of taken out of the box and a
Yeah.
quick and dirty setup. So um, I
No,
it
no real opinion
you
of
know
the car yet.
just looking at it, it I cannot imagine it being very different from the 908 and how it drives because they're almost identical. And in
Yeah.
fact, I think Jim Rose has said like it's basically a straight chassis swap. Like you could fit the chassis under the other.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, it's got a few little refinements that I think are really good. Like there's more space around the pod, which I would love to see more slot car companies do that. We just did a whole thing on like Magic Car, right? And talking about the things that lead to that, one of which is like just variance in manufacturing. And I would love to see more car companies account for that and
Yeah.
leave, more space where parts are supposed to move, leave too much space, right? Because
Yeah.
I don't know how many times you get a chassis and a pod and you've got a couple of them getting ready for a race and they all fit together a little bit different.
Right.
And it's like we talk concepts, not cars. Like you can't get the concept that you want because they don't fit together right. And uh, yeah, I think NSR did a really good job. Um, just making like the little refinements. Like it's overall their same design, but just like a few little things that are really great.
Yeah. I think that. Yeah. The Lola is of mine. I've spent a little bit of time with it. I didn't. I do this like baseline tuning thing so I'm consistent when I like review a car. So I kind of do the same things and then throw it on the track and see how it performs before I like dig in and do like a race prep type of tuning for it.
Yeah.
And I, at first I was like, the Lola's not even close to my 908. And then I put more laps on it, done a few more things, and on Sunday it was screaming around the track. But going back to the concepts, not cars, at the Eastern Nationals, Andrea did something that kind of blew everybody away. If you looked at everybody's cars, everybody had kind of weight everywhere and trying different things on that track. And then we sat down with Andrea and he's like, okay, get rid of all the ballast. This is how you set up the front end. Like he set up a car in like 3 minutes and won the race with it. And it kind of blew my mind that really it can be that simple depending on the car and the track. And that was his concept, right? He was going to do that to
Yeah.
any car that he was going to jump on the track with, because that's how he likes a car to drive and perform. And so like sometimes you just have to figure out what do you like. I really have enjoyed those lighter cars. He basically started making me rethink some of the ballast I had. And so I've lightened up some of my cars and they're performing better. And I kind of like driving them. And then I throw it to my brother and he's like, yeah, I don't really like that. I need more weight.
It's funny because everyone's got a little bit different preference. Everyone's got a little bit different, like you said, based on their driving style. So, like early on, I remember Rick Jockum saying basically the same thing to me. Like seeing lead tape in my car and it's like, that out of there. You don't want that. And, and I drive it and I'd be like, I can't
Yeah.
drive this. Like, how are you driving this car? And Rick is like one of the most accurate drivers. Like if you watch
Yeah.
him drive, like you can hear his brake from across the room because he hits it like just perfect, and his controller's like slamming into that brake stop like
Yeah.
every time. And when you drive like that, you can drive a super light car and drive on that edge. And you know, I don't know if I could do it or not, but I also find cars to be faster with a little bit of weight. That's just like how I like to tune. And
Yeah.
but to what I think Andrea was what I take from that is starting starting simple, right? Ian.
Sorry. That's funny.
That's what I do.
It's
He
yeah,
knows.
me
He's
too.
been on long phone calls with me.
I do this. I do this every Tuesday, whether I have a guest or not. So most of the time, it's 90 minutes of me talking. So everybody knows that I talk too much.
Yeah, everyone gets it. Now they get to hear me talking too much.
That's all good.
But I think there's something to be said for starting from a simple spot before you start to do things like adding weight to a car.
Yeah.
Like I almost always will take a car and drive it for the first few laps around the track at least without any weight at all.
Yeah.
Because if the car doesn't need weight, then you don't need to throw it in there. It's
Yeah.
probably going to need some, but you may as well see how it's going to naturally want to behave before you start just slapping a bunch of weight in there. And I think that's probably the most important thing, right? Is not not starting from a place of just like throwing a bunch of things in the car and seeing if it works, because you're never going to, get. It's much harder to get to a point of it being good if you're doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of
You
the
could have
guys
a
are.
lot of things working against each other.
Yeah. A lot of the guys are commenting on the great takeaway was changing one thing at a time. And I think we all know that, but sometimes we need reminded because you get
Oh,
in
I
there.
I need reminded of that. Ian will tell you, like, sometimes I usually will call him if I'm on the way home from the track, especially if we're prepping for a big race. And he kind of relies on me a little bit to give him like intel from what's working on the track and what's not. And he'll get so frustrated sometimes because, like I said, during the week, if I'm there, I'm there for maybe an hour at most. So if I'm doing things, I got to do them quick.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes I will get ahead of myself and try two or three things at once. And then I'm explaining to him later. He's like, "God, I wish you wouldn't do that. I now I don't know what
Right.
works and what
Yeah.
doesn't." So we all need reminding of that if, sometimes,
Yeah. But I think the more
to
you
do
do
as I
this,
say, not as I do.
yeah, but I think the more you do it, you kind of understand the direction you need to go. And so sometimes you
Yeah.
can like do that second step because I'm eventually probably going to have to get to there because I understand this car really well. But you're right. You got to slow down sometimes and just take it. This is a good question from Slot Car Nomad. What controller features are most useful? But first, what kind of controller do you use? And what do you like about it? And then, what features does it have that you depend on?
So I use True Speed Apex. And I think I was one of the first people, at least in the California group, um, using that controller. And this is probably actually it was Scale Auto 2023. I got it like the 2 days before that race, and I actually ended up using it in the Enduro. But the thing that drove me to that controller or really caught my eye was like a lot of the brake controls that it has,
Yeah.
right? Because it can do more than just overall brake strength, right? It's got uh, hold, release, it's got apply rate. So, Steve at TrueSpeed does a really good job of explaining those in like real car terms, right? Of
Yeah.
like, it's not just, pushing on the brake pedal. It's how fast are you applying the brakes? How quickly are you releasing them? How long are you holding them before you release them, right? Like,
Yeah.
and while it may seem, I think, to people on the outside that that's, almost kind of uh, driving the car for you. Um, it's really, when you use it in practice, it's not. It really just kind of changes your timing a bit, but it can make the car more consistent, right?
Right.
Um, and just having that adjustability, I think, is really big, especially for racing where you've got a ton of track evolution, you've got things changing all the time. It makes um, racing within that really easily. But the feature that I think on that a lot of that I don't see on a lot of 132 controllers that I wish they had is that it has a choke with a
Yeah.
full throttle bypass. So They don't call it choke; it's called end speed on the true speed, but it turns down the power everywhere but full throttle, and it's so. I mean, like I don't know why 132 racers haven't used this, forever. And I know people
Yeah.
have. It's not.
Right.
I think I'm the first one that's discovered pretty much any of this stuff. In fact, I tell Ian that all the time. I'm like, everything we've figured out, someone figured out 10 times before us. It's just it all gets recycled, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't see a lot of people using them. I don't like, I had a DeFalco, which DeFalco is a great controller.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the best controllers for people to, especially to start out with. But he makes some really high end great controllers as well. But it didn't have a choke,
Yeah.
and I didn't know that some of that was kind of at first what was making cars harder to control, right?
Right.
Because you've just got all this power in a tiny little car that you know
Yeah.
it doesn't want to take all that.
Yeah. Not until you get in the straightaway where you can where it can handle it. And so if you can tame that
Right.
just slightly as you're accelerating out of a turn, then it prevents you from flying out of the slot and keeps you on the track.
But I
Yeah.
think a lot of new controllers, especially like you look at like the DS controller that just came out,
Yeah.
that PHN, and it's I think a lot of these things are starting to hit um, the mainstream
Yeah.
for a company like DS to be incorporating what they call dynamic braking, which is really kind of like braking with a release. They've got a volt action in there. Although I did tell Yvonne at Scale Auto that it needs to be like, I think it drops like 1 volt. I'm like, you got to drop that way down. Like have like a 2 or 3 volt reduction. I don't know, make it adjustable.
Yeah.
But I think they're coming out with new controllers that are gonna, build on that, and
Yeah.
um, that's their plan, and I think that's great, right?
Yeah.
Like
I
there's
agree. Having some
um,
choices, that'd be great.
and for a company like DS too, that's a big company. I always make the joke that every controller company is just one guy, and bless them that they do it, because it's great, and we're spoiled for a lot of good controllers, but it's always just one guy, and as
Right.
soon as anything gets disrupted, it's like
There's
then
a
that
shortage.
is
Yeah.
suddenly your controller is just like unsupported after
Yeah.
in some instances. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to see like the bigger companies kind of grasping onto that.
Yeah. I agree. Larry asks, what are your thoughts on motor break-in?
Yes. um, yeah, I think motor break-in is one of those things where I have two schools of thought on it. For people that are willing to take the time and learn how to do it, and willing to um, maybe ruin a few motors in the process of learning, I'm all about telling you how I do it, and uh, you know in the nitty gritty detail. As I've told some people, I don't keep it secret for the reasons of like competitiveness. It's really I just don't want to be responsible for people ruining a bunch of motors.
Yeah.
But what I do tell people, like, at its simplest, almost any motor run for 15 to 20 minutes, maybe even a little longer in just distilled water. Like it does them, it gets you probably 80-90% of the way there,
Yeah.
right? You're really just trying to get more brush in contact with the comm, and get those brushes kind of shaped to the comm when they're not being run in air, right?
Yeah.
Um, so you're not getting like arcing that's pitting out the comm.
Right.
It's going to shape them quicker, and you've got motors like slotted motors have super hard brushes, and it's funny because we get to slotted nationals, and I hear so many people talk about breaking in their motors on the track, and I wish I could put up a picture right now, but I've got like a picture of one of Brandon Phillips' motors from 2023 that he gave me in 2024 to like break in for him. He's like, "Oh, I've broken this in a bunch on the track. It got run a lot last year." And I cleaned it out and looked at it, and the comm was basically like barrel shaped. You know how the brushes are on a
Yeah.
comm because they're like
Right.
they're like this. the brushes shaped the comm instead of the other way around because they're so hard on the slotted motors. And it's the whole breaking it on the track thing. I think it sounds really good.
Yeah.
Um, but in actuality, if you break it in and get those brushes bedded in a little bit beforehand, the motor will actually run better and run longer
Yeah.
than if you just like run it straight out of the box.
And cooler and all those things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did a video early on on my channel because I'd watched Cleve Tech break in a motor. A great
Yeah.
video from him. And the first one I did, it worked perfect. Motor came out and I tested it and it was great. And then the second one, it was in there like 5 minutes. I looked down and the water was black and it just the brushes had
Yep.
disintegrated. It's like, oh well,
Oh
I
yeah.
guess that didn't work on that one. So I learned
I still
a quick
remember like
lesson. So I'm real
the
careful about
first
that too.
days of doing that. Yeah, like Ian and Herman, because they come from the 24 world where like that's what you do. They know a
Yeah,
lot of those tricks. And I remember we were breaking in, I think it was breaking in an NSR motor, and they're like, "Oh, you got to use simple green." I'm like, "Okay." And I'm like, "How much do I use?" They're like 50-50. And anyone who's broken in motors is probably going to start laughing now. They're like, "Mix it like 50-50." And I was like, "Okay." And if you don't know, NSR motors have really soft brushes. And I put it in there and like turned on the voltage like 5 seconds, and the brushes were just gone. And that's $20,
yeah, right.
$20.
Yeah,
It's just, and that's, again, to the point of like, I don't keep it to myself
yeah,
out of a sense of like secrecy. It is really just like, I I will give it to someone if I trust that they understand like the risk of doing it, and I have in the past. Um, I don't want to be the one that people blame for
right. Yeah. No,
torching a bunch of
yeah, and
motors.
I kind of in my video when I did that, I was like, um, somebody, my friend Daryl, he immediately tried it and destroyed a motor, and he's like, I'm never doing
Yeah.
that again. I'm like, I'm sorry, Daryl. You shouldn't. Don't pay attention. I don't know anything. Don't pay attention to my video. Um, Ryan asked, what are some of your favorite tires on the routed track, on a wood routed track?
Um, so I have to caveat it with we run on gloss epoxy, which is
Yeah.
very different from flat latex. So if you
Right.
run on a flat latex wood routed track, it's gonna be different. If you run on a track that's spray glued, it's gonna be different.
Yeah.
On gloss epoxy, I really love the Scale Auto AS25s. I think they are one of the best tires
Yeah.
made. The way those tires uh, break in and just keep getting better, 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 and they just kind of reach this point of just being really great, and they just stay there. And even the AS20s do the same thing. In fact, the car that Yvonne ran this year at Scale Auto had the tires on it that I had trued for a car in 2023 for Scale Auto, had been used in maybe like 5 or 6 LMP races. I think they had the track record for LMP on those tires. 2 years plus
Yeah.
of a tires being on a set of wheel, and they look like silicones. If they've just gotten to this point where like they're just good and they stay good.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of companies have tires that will stay in that condition for that long. Um, so yeah, I think they've done a really good job with that. But the other one I really like is the slotted G25. Um, I think when you really learn how to true them well, which is really just an exercise of keeping them cool, um, it's one of the most versatile tires, I think, um, uh, because you can do texture to it, right? And
Yeah.
drop the grip down or run it as a slick, and it can have a lot of grip. Um, and if you're running on a track that's spray glued, it's also really great to run it as an inter on that. It cuts through that glue really well.
Yeah.
Another tire that I also really like is the BRM 30 Shore, which is not a common tire. It's not like one it's kind of hard to find, but it's the same rubber, I believe, is like the stock Revo slot tires,
Yeah.
and it takes a long time to break in, but once you get that thing broken in, it's a phenomenal tire. It's a really resilient tire. It doesn't really get affected by a lot of stuff on the track. It kind of deals with a lot of conditions well. And that's another one that works really well on spray glued tracks.
Have you messed with the new NSR tire? I know it's developed for plastic, right? But
I
the
have a
the
set
zero graining.
somewhere here right in front of me, actually. I have it on the car that I was just putting them together. So yeah, I do have them on this car,
Yeah.
which is the zero graining. I'm not sure if you can even
Yeah.
really see that. Um, I haven't put a lot of time on them, but it's definitely it feels very similar to a super grip, but it does seem like it's got a little bit better kind of wear pattern. Um, but yeah, I without having put like a ton of time and like actually racing on it,
Right.
um,
It's hard to tell.
it's hard to really say.
Yeah. My brother asked, "How do you keep the stickers on the motors when you break them in water?"
So this might be, I don't know if this is controversial or not. I used to leave them on there and like they would get all ratty, and then
Yeah.
I'd like try to cover them in like packing tape or something to just like hold them together. Um, and I started, especially with NSR motors, because they're just like a paper label. I
Yeah.
started just taking a little. I have a like modeling heat gun, which is really more like a mini hair dryer, and just like peeling them off and setting them aside while I break in the motor, and then putting them
Putting it
back
back
on
on. Yeah.
when I'm done. And I know like we use a lot of spec motors in classes, and most of these you've got like the NSR on the can and the RPM on the can, so I don't really think much about it because the motor is written on the can, so
Right.
no one's going to say I'm like swapping labels or anything, but it definitely keeps the label from being just a ratty mess,
Yeah.
which is what you get when you break them into
Yep.
water.
Yep. Sure does. Well, Todd, we are at 9:30, which is probably your dinner time, or you maybe missed dinner out there in California. But this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you jumping on
Yeah, I
the live
appreciate you having
stream.
me on.
Yeah, great questions from the guys there towards the end, and just thanks for sharing your story and sharing a lot of the details. I think we have a lot to take away, and good luck on the podcast with Ian. I know you probably need a lot of I don't know to get through recording with Ian. He was giving you a hard time. I got to figure out a way to give him a hard time.
Yeah, it's fine.
But
It's all
you
right.
guys
He's
have
got to
great
he's got
chemistry.
to record before the before it reaches like 8 o'clock,
Yeah,
because
that's
that's
right.
when he
Yeah,
starts getting ready for bed. And
turns into a pumpkin.
yeah,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but no, good luck on the Spinning Pinion podcast. You guys are doing a great job. Excited to
thank you.
see what's coming down the pike. I think it'll be great information for everyone. And again, it's just continuing more people putting out great content. Is just great for the hobby. So, especially from the racing side of things, just we have so much going on right now. Whether it's home
Yeah,
tracks, club tracks, racing. There's just so much to the hobby, and we have great choices and then good people. You're one of them, so I appreciate it. And then hopefully we get a chance to meet in person someday, and we'll get some laps in together, and you can show me what it's like to go fast.
yeah, yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, Todd, thanks. Guys, thanks for tuning in this week. And like I say every time, go have some fun racing.